Hello everyone and welcome to the midweek live stream on how to make a permaculture livelihood. I want to follow up on some of the earlier conversations I've had about permaculture as a business and making a living in this world to talk about some of the conversations I've had with colleagues about how they're making this work. I will talk about some folks who, as far as I'm aware of, are making a living directly through permaculture and how they're doing that as I understand it, and then from there talk about how other folks I know are putting it all together. Because one of the things that has become apparent to me over the years is that many of the models that we're taught aren't ones that we can easily replicate or ones that we can use readily in our own lives, which is part of why I've started offering things like meanderings so that folks can sit down and have a conversation about where they're at, what they're doing, and how to apply permaculture to their lives as they are where they live. And it's part of the struggle that I've gone through over the years as well, is trying different things to see what would work and what would stick, and how to engage in permaculture and something that I enjoy so much and is so meaningful to me every day, and to try to do it within the confines of the systems that we exist in, and that, land can be expensive, or not everybody is on the land, and things like that. And so that's where I wanted to look at this idea of a permaculture livelihood today, is from that framework of kind of like what didn't work, and talk a bit about what I know that does. Before we get into that, however, if this is your first time tuning in, whether live or as you catch the replay, if you'd like to get in touch with me, of course, the best way to do that is by email, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. You can send me a message any time of day, anywhere in the world, and I will try to get back with you within 1 or 2 business days. I'm usually in the office Monday through Friday between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern. You can also, if you would like, call or text 717-827-6266. I respond to those as I'm able. Usually phone calls are 2 days a week, like Tuesday and Friday, or Monday and Thursday, depending on the week at hand. And of course, if you're somewhere else in the world and would like to get in touch, I do use WhatsApp to reach out to colleagues who are around the world so that we can communicate that way. So feel free to get me in touch there, +1 717-827 6266. And if you'd like to know what's going on with the show behind the scenes, you can always join us on Patreon at patreon.com/permaculturepodcast. So, when I first took my permaculture design course with Ben Weiss and Dylan Cruz back in 2010, a lot of our conversation was around, once you took a permaculture design course, you were aware of more about permaculture than probably 99 or 99.9% of people in the world. So the idea then was to take a PDC and then teach. So take one, teach one. Or if you were interested, to go ahead and hang out a shingle and become a permaculture designer, which is something that I approached when I was going through this, and I looked at creating a design company back in 2010. Though found that in Pennsylvania, at least, the rules for doing so, because of what permaculture design represented, was not easy to do in order to get the business insurance and licenses and everything else that would allow me to practice permaculture. It was kind of outside the purview of what was possible at the time. And then, of course, I have taught permaculture design courses off and on over the years, online and in person, either as the lead instructor organizing them, or as a guest. And it's something that if you are a permaculture practitioner and you have the opportunity to teach, I think that it's really important to do so because of what you can learn through the process. But when it comes to permaculture as a livelihood, it's not something that I would recommend as the way that you try to make your living completely. As I've watched how permaculture education has changed over the years, a lot of the PDCs that were available at the time just don't exist. From what I've been following around the world, permaculture design courses are offered less and less in person, and as they've moved online, they're being offered by a smaller and smaller group of dedicated folks who are doing that. Some that come to mind in particular are Verge Permaculture has an online PDC in Canada. There is Andrew Millison with the Oregon State University program that he started there, which has a lot of instructors working there as well. Jeff Lawton's online PDC, which has been running for a number of years and has been very popular. And so as more folks have been taking their PDCs online in those places, the opportunities to move into that space as a new permaculture practitioner are more limited. And it kind of changes the way that we would do this. So I would certainly still suggest looking for ways that you can teach permaculture, but doing that as a way to develop all of your income from permaculture doesn't exist in the way that it used to. But I've also had a lot of fun when it comes to teaching permaculture is teaching aspects of it at nature centers and conferences and anywhere that I could spend some time with folks to share permaculture. Vermicomposting workshops were some of my favorite and most fun to teach. Kids absolutely loved the worms. It kind of squicked out their parents a little, but then, we could talk about how that was a useful way to compost, as well as for where I lived at the time, there were a number of anglers who lived in the area, and some of those families came out to my composting with worms lectures, and I would start talking about how they could use them to go fishing, and then the family perked up a little bit more about that. So, but in doing that, if you do want to teach something like that, my recommendation is to plan out what you could teach is to choose a subject within permaculture, not the whole thing, maybe an introduction to permaculture, and something that you could teach, like create an outline for 1 hour, 4 hours, 2 days, and 4 days. And by doing that, you'll create enough material that if you need to do something shorter, you can compress it a little. If you need to teach a little bit more, you can. I find one of my big mistakes from teaching in the beginning was developing too much material and trying to cram it all in. Even now, I've been talking about teaching permaculture for a few minutes, and that wasn't where I intended to go. But it's just something that I really enjoy. Similarly, for anyone who has taken a permaculture design course who would like the opportunity to teach material, reach out to me. Again, email show@thepermaculturepodcast.com, because I am looking for guest instructors and student instructors for when I teach the ecological literacy and design course, as well as the permaculture practicum. Oh, yes. The Permaculture Women's Guild PDC is another one. Thank you for bringing that up in the chat. I've been in touch with Heather Jo Flores over the years, who was organizing that, as well as some of her instructors. Many of them have been guests on the show in the past, and I really like what they've put together for that, and the opportunities that are there, and the kind of support that they've been able to provide to students. Know a couple folks who have gone through that, and really the feedback that they've provided for me is, thumbs up from me. But when it comes to making a living from permaculture, I don't know many people who are doing so directly from their permaculture work. Jeff Lawton, I've already mentioned. As far as I know, he's been doing very well through his online PDC. But also, he was kind of, as I understand, Bill's heir apparent in some ways, and so was able to work with Bill for a while and build that up and gain a lot of knowledge in his own following over time. David Holmgren, of course, through Meliadora Publishing and his work within the permaculture community, teaching about reading the landscape. My understanding is David is comfortable and secure in that. Rosemary Morrow is someone else who comes to mind. through all of her teaching and outreach and speaking that most of her work is within this permaculture realm. But those folks who are doing that are few and far between compared to the rest of us. Everybody who I know is largely cobbling together a living. And now I won't mention many names as I go through this because of the information that's been shared with me. There are a couple of folks who I will refer to by name because of them appearing on the show in the past and talking about some of this. But most of the folks that I know who are, or like whose books you would have on your shelves, or you might encounter in permaculture media or elsewhere, they're doing it by cobbling a lifestyle together and creating a living through a variety of different means. There is this public-facing piece that we're familiar with because that's how we interact with them in the permaculture community or how we know them, but most of them are, their permaculture work is only a small portion of their overall income. So many of them have a day job, either full or part-time, that is non-permaculture work that helps fill in those gaps. Myself, in addition to the podcast, which provides a certain income because of having done it for so long, and Patreon and sponsors and donations and things like that, the show pays for itself. But to make up that difference, I do a lot of editing work for authors behind the scenes. People reach out and send me a manuscript, and I'll go through and read it and edit it and provide feedback as a paid endeavor. Similarly, I also offer media trainings to people where we can sit down and I can help prepare them for their next product launch or podcast, interview, book tour, what they're working on so that they can make sure that their talking points are clear. They've been able to work through some mock interviews, and we can pose some questions that they might not necessarily be prepared to answer. Similarly, like meanderings and consultations are other things that I do in order to fill out this work. And sometimes those conversations are about like, what shouldn't we do? And whether or not making this kind of a transition is worth putting our time and energy into, because it isn't guaranteed and can be, there's just a lot of work that can go into it. And that's where, like, talking with some of my colleagues, some of them are doing things that are completely unrelated to permaculture. As I say, I'm editing books very often that have nothing to do with permaculture. Then I have other friends who are doing, PR work for nonprofit companies, or which, they can do in less than a full-time schedule, allowing them time to do their other permaculture work. Talking with some of the folks who have been on the show who are authors whose books you've probably read. Not many of them are making a living as writers around this material. Only recently I found out from someone whose work I've enjoyed for many, many years, and they've written many books in this space, are just now, after some time, finally making a living as a full-time writer in the permaculture and regenerative space. Similarly, there are folks who are doing permaculture adjacent jobs or finding places where they can apply their permaculture knowledge to plants in the environment and building businesses around those. So nursery businesses are ones that I've heard from many folks about that are comfortably lucrative on relatively small amounts of land. Akiva Silver, in my conversation with him, I don't remember the amount of space that he has, but if I remember right, it's less than an acre. He's making, a good income from that. Michael Judd reiterated that to me at one point as well, that a nursery business is one of the recommendations that he had for people. That if you're good with plants, that's something that can be a really good permaculture-related business to start, because there are so many niches that you can get involved in. And it's often the conversation that I have with folks is, if you want to start a business that you can build up over a couple of years, nursery work is what I keep coming back to. There was a native plant specialist who I used to purchase my elderberries and some other things from in Pennsylvania. As I say, Michael Judd did a lot with pawpaws and had a lot of success. Akiva Silver's nurseries, as I understand, is like something like 20,000 trees on less than an acre. Similarly, when I visited both Holly Brown of Island Creek Farm and the O'Neills at Radical Roots, they were talking about, the O'Neills in particular, about how their nursery business is what ensured that they could then do a lot of their other work. Now, as always, it's been a number of years since I've seen them, so please don't take that as a direct quote from them, but my recollection of that time together. And that, yeah, nurseries, just something that has a lot of potential for anybody who wants to do this. Other than that, landscaping businesses also popular within the permaculture space as something to do. It's Jessie Bloom for all the books that she's written. You know, my understanding is that her company is not only a design company, but also an implementation. And that's where some of the permaculture work gets a little interesting, because there's a lot of opportunity for designers just because that's what we're taught. But those skills to actually implement it aren't necessarily fostered. And something that I would like to see more of in like professional permaculture courses, like the Permaculture Practicum that I've discussed, is let's talk about how do you create a business plan? How do you get funding? How do you manage an organization? What does it look like to actually plant plants in the ground? I can't say that I necessarily have a lot of experience along those lines, but there are folks I could reach out to for that. And there are some interviews that I would point back to for that as well. Similarly, as I say, other permaculture adjacent jobs that folks are getting into is agriculture, growing food. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you've never grown to just hop in. There are paths to get there and experiences that I would recommend that one has. But even a few thousand square feet of garden space can make a difference if you live in a place where you could put out a roadside stand, and that's okay. You know, start to build up some income from that while you're still doing your other work. And that's where, when it comes to creating a permaculture livelihood, there are a lot of different ways to still engage in permaculture while earning some kind of an income from it. And I've kind of given a rundown of some things that do work, don't work, adjacent, and places that you might want to go. But if this is something that you'd like to do, I would recommend using your knowledge of permaculture and design to put a transition plan in place. Plot out where you are now and where you want to be, and see how long it would take you to get there. What can you do to develop those skills that you'll need in 5 years over the next year or two? By using design and creating a plan, you can approach this and find out where exactly is it that you want to create a livelihood around permaculture. You may find that it has nothing to do with an entrepreneurial endeavor or earning an income from it, but how one can create more stability in their own lives. Because that's where I think that one of the big lines for permaculture practitioners is the impact that permaculture can have on our ability to live these deeply fulfilling lives, regardless of where we find ourselves or what we're doing. That we can use our knowledge of design and plants and gardening to reduce our food costs, increase the quality of our food, and through that, our health and nutrition. And be in a place that we are taking better care of ourselves and our loved ones and our community. And by doing so, create connections that tie into other forms of capital. And so a livelihood may be about an income and a business. And if you have been listening to this and you have questions about that, again, feel free to email me and let me know what your exact questions are so I can address them again so that I can address this topic with those specific questions in a future live stream. And as I say, when you put that plan together, do a deep needs and yields analysis of yourself. your family, the situation that you're in. If you are renting an apartment and don't have access to land, that's a different prospect than somebody who lives on a couple of hectares somewhere. But that person who is on a couple of hectares somewhere may need a truck and other resources to get from where they are to town, which changes that conversation as well. As we're permaculture practitioners and we try to think well into the future, right now, as I'm recording this, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there's a spike in gas prices in the United States, which has a lot of people, from what I'm reading in the news and elsewhere, reevaluating their fuel costs, their transportation costs, the vehicles that they use. Well, what if we apply that then to what it means to have our permaculture livelihood? Can we take the vehicle that we have right now that costs us a certain amount and downgrade to something, I don't want to say downgrade, but transition, move to something that is less expensive to operate, and how would that impact our lives and our opportunities to engage in permaculture full time? I had the conversation a few years ago about, Annie Racer Rowland was on the show, and we talked about frugal hedonism and about how both she and I had lived well below our respective countries' poverty lines in order to do the work that we enjoyed. Similarly, from something that an elder in the permaculture community shared with me, they have lived in such a way that they have paid virtually no taxes into the system because of how little income they've had over the years, and the way that not needing a lot of resources has allowed them to continue to do what they love. And that as permaculture practitioners, I feel that we are better suited to make those kinds of decisions or live in ways that are radically divergent from what the world at large requests. And that's something that David Holmgren has spoken to a number of times over the years, is, if we kind of pull back from the society at large, we can make a huge difference for ourselves and our communities. And if you haven't read it, I do recommend Retro Suburbia. It's a big book, lots of great information there, but is really permaculture at the household and community scale for your neighborhood or, your town where you live. Highly recommend it. Folks, hopping back over to the chat. Sorry, I haven't been here for a while. If you have any questions about anything that I was talking about there, I highly recommend. No, if you want to, drop a question in the chat and I'll get back to it. Nathan, you keep wanting to start a nursery but not sure how to deal with the ethics of native plants and settler colonialism. It's still something that I continue to struggle with as I work through the ideas of, to decolonize, and what's been shared with me, and how much of what we experience and where we are in the world that we're not within monoliths. I wish Jason Godesky was here today for this one, because there's a conversation that he and I had about monoliths and colonialism and culture and native to when and a bunch of other different pieces that go into that conversation, and I don't know. And my own biases are rooted within, my upbringing, which has a lot to do with that as well. And that, for the way that I was raised, the only war is class war. So that has a different take. Yeah. I would be more, if you have any thoughts on that, like, I'm just sitting here trying to turn that over, and it's not one that I have any clear thoughts on. So if you're in the chat while this is live, feel free. If you have any thoughts on the ethics of native plants and settler colonialism, I'd love to hear more. If you have resources that I could read to make better sense of this, I would love to. I'm always trying to educate myself, but I also recognize my own ignorance and don't always know what resources are out there or what I should be interacting with, and how that varies by culture and community, region, and where folks are, and where we're invited in and where we're asked not to tread. Yeah. Or similarly, if you're watching this on replay, certainly drop a comment in the episode and let me know if you have any thoughts on that as well. It's something that I still struggle with, even though I've had some conversations with folks about how we can do that. And I don't know. Yeah, because there's conversations about cultural transference and like what is settler colonialism versus an exchange, the land that we're on. Yeah, it's a very complicated kind of question. Well, thank you, Nathan. I was not expecting, for that kind of an ethical question to kind of roll into the conversation today, and I wish that I had thoughts on it, or a direction that we could take that in the moment. What are your thoughts on if you were to create a nursery that handled garden plants or non-native plants, or is it even the impact that those imported plants could have on the native plant community, and where that could go when it comes to changing a biome or invasive species, or what could be considered invasive species. What is it? I'll have to look. There's a book that I have on invasive species what is it? Like George Theodoropoulos, invasive species, something pseudoscience. I'll see if I still have it. That argues about novel ecosystems, and I know it's like David Holmgren has talked about novel ecosystems, but then I run into the work of like Doug Tallamy, who clearly lays out the research about the impact that native species have on supporting our local biome. Yeah, there's a lot there that I could dig into. I will write that down I will make some notes after this live stream about some things to research and explore for future conversations about just the ethics of native plants in general. Not the ethics of native plants, but the ethics of importing plants and non-native species versus native species, what we can do to support things. And then also I wonder about like native plants in the face of climate change because of some things. Well, as I said earlier, I believe I mentioned the phrase like native to when, which is a big thing that Toby Hemingway would bring up when it came to plants because of what we would find in a region historically but wouldn't find in the modern era, and how we define nativeness. There's a lot. Yeah, you've kind of broken my brain over this, Nathan, about where this could go and the conversation that could be had around that question, as well as settler colonialism and invasive species, native or novel ecosystems, changing biomes, the impacts of climate change on plants and animals, and how does that vary what we would do in the future, something like permaculture in the zone model, and where would we be comfortable creating change and suggesting planting certain things, though knowing that birds or animals can carry away plant material, including seeds, and disperse them, and the impacts that can have. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. Anyway, it's a lot for me to think about. But when it comes to this piece of a permaculture livelihood, I know it's just kind of an overview of some of the places that we might go and what we might do, but while we're still here, do you have any questions about that piece in particular or anything related to it? Yeah, let me take a drink here, and I will review a couple of things and then reply to any questions or anything else that shows up into the chat. If there's nothing else that you'd like me to cover during our call today, then I will bring it to a close. But from here, the upcoming live streams, the next will be on Tuesday, March 15th at 8 p.m. Eastern, where I'll be looking at the technique trap, taking that idea of the previous live stream, looking at focusing on design and discuss more, which kind of took a top-down approach to permaculture. And now I want to look at this from the bottom up and discuss how, depending on what we're reading and what we're exposed to, can get us to focus on certain techniques and how that can kind of wall us in, and what can we do then to step away from that and move our way back up the permaculture pyramid back to our design and the ethics and principles, and working our way then from that top back down to arrive at the techniques that are most appropriate for what we would want to apply in a particular landscape or where we live. After that, on Thursday, March 24th, another afternoon live stream will be on learning lost skills and some of the books and resources that I've referred to over the years for building up my knowledge of things like flint knapping and, making a bow, making digging sticks, and a lot of other tools that are super useful as a permaculture practitioner and are applicable across a wide range of situations and where we might find ourselves. Something that I think is really important in the face of climate change, because many of these skills are applicable regardless of where we are in the world and what we're facing. And I use many of them, every day in my life, from, making repairs around the home to thinking my way through a problem, and really see learning a lot of these skills as really useful. Everything from seed saving to making tools from wood and stone. After that, I'll be on the road to North Carolina from Sunday, March 27th through Friday, April 1st. I will be visiting a couple of projects, permaculture projects and permaculture adjacent projects while I'm there, looking to shoot video at least 2 sites, possibly more. We'll see how that goes and who I'll be visiting with and whether or not they give me permission to record. Probably taking the camera that this live stream is being streamed through to shoot some run and gun kind of stuff, as well as having some of my better equipment with me and see what we can get. After that will be a live stream on Tuesday, April 5th at 8 p.m. about foraging book recommendations. Probably the best plant knowledge that I have gained that really grounded me in the landscape and what was available was spending time foraging, finding out about a plant that grows in cities or a readily available urban environment, because that's where I've lived, and then going and trying it. Eating magnolia blossoms and that lovely kind of a citrus perfume flavor of the one that I tasted, or like always being on the lookout for a beautiful hosta. There are so many skills that I find that come together once one starts foraging, that even if you're not foraging to harvest for your table, just the act of going out and looking for plants does so much to return us to the space where we live in and get us to look for those things that are at our feet or above our eye level, and to look around and see what's there. And so I want to go over some of those books that I found most useful, discuss how to, if you're not in one of the areas that these authors cover, how those books are still useful to your process, and then what to look for when searching for a foraging book if you are outside of the biomes that I am familiar with and have books for. And probably close that out then with how, again, foraging has had a big impact on myself, and I think that it's a useful skill to engage in. And then, as there's nothing else new in the chat, thank you everybody for being here and participating. If you want to get in touch with me, feel free to email show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. You can call or text 717-827-6266 at any time. I return text messages as I'm able throughout the day. Calls are usually Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday, depending on the week. And then you can also, if you use WhatsApp, similar to text messages, feel free to drop me a WhatsApp message at +1 717-827-6266. And then, of course, if you'd like to join in the Patreon community, you can join. If you sign up for a year, it's less than $1 a month. You'll get weekly updates about what's been going on with the show, including things like why the podcast website is currently broken and will be so for a few weeks. As the next weekly update will address when that's coming back online and what's happening. And yeah, there's just a lot going on there, and I always enjoy getting messages from the community and getting to hang out with folks. Oh, whoa. Thank you everybody for dropping everything in here at the end. I didn't have my window up to see how many people were on the stream. Great to see everybody. But let me get through this real quick before we draw it to a close. Nathan, no worries about walking away. I was just kind of thinking through some things, and it took me a bit to work through the thoughts. But yeah, my wife and I take foraging walks not as frequently as I would like, but when we're walking around town, it's like, hey, what's this, what's that? We'll take pictures and try to identify when we get back, or I'll look for them later. Corinne, you're foraging for violets today. That was the first plant that I taught my daughter how to identify, and we would go pick violets all day long, and just eat the flowers fresh from the yard. We happened to have, it would just be grass, and it would just be green and purple through a large section of our yard, so we could eat more or less as many as we wanted to. It was always fun. I've also heard, and I need to go look this up and see whether or not it's an urban, whether it's a mythical kind of thing or if it's actually true, but that every time we smell a violet, it's like smelling them for the first time. And I don't know if that's because every violet smells a little bit different, or if it's just something about that combination that we're not able to hold on to. But violets are also, making violet syrup for like homemade drinks and cocktails, so good. I really should do a live stream on cocktails and share some of my favorite basic recipes and talk about how we can build up drinks from there. It's something that I really love as part of foraging, and someone who's interested in food, all the interesting flavors that we can add to our plate, and that I find that making drinks, whether with or without alcohol, is an amazing way to engage with flavors and build up our knowledge of what's around us and how we might be able to pair things in the kitchen. It's just a lot of fun. Thank you, Ephemeral, for tuning in from Portugal. It's good to know that folks are being able to join us from all around the world during these afternoon streams. And Steve, it's also good to see you here for another live stream. I promise I will get through everything that you sent me here and do a live stream on water, and we'll have a good conversation about that too. But thank you everybody for being here, and we will do another one of these in 5 days. And I hope that all of you who are able can join me then on Tuesday the 15th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, and wherever else you can find us in the world. And as always, if not, these are available for replay on the YouTube channel. Take care, everybody. My best to you all. And as always, until the next time, spend each day considering your permaculture livelihood while taking care of Earth, yourself, and each other.